Welcome back one last time. Over the past 5 episodes, we've dissected the often frustrating reality behind the headlines of mass protest. We explored the iron fist of autocratic repression and the velvet glove of democratic absorption. We delved into the crucial roles of international patrons, internal movement dynamics, and the double-edged sword of digital technology. Our guiding question has remained constant. Why do mass demonstrations, so common in our era, seem to struggle so much when it comes to the ultimate prize, overthrowing the incumbent regime? Today, in our concluding episode, we attempt to bring it all together. We'll synthesize the key factors we've identified across different contexts. We'll revisit some core theoretical ideas, putting the famous 3-5% rule under the microscope of modern realities. We'll engage in some necessary academic self-flagellation by acknowledging the methodological limitations of this analysis. And finally, we'll reflect on the broader theoretical implications and what this all might mean for the future study and practice of popular uprisings. Let's try to make sense of the patterns, or perhaps the lack thereof. So what have we learned? If we try to synthesize the findings from our journey, a picture emerges, perhaps less of a single cause, more of a confluence of reinforcing barriers, as the model on the slide attempts to visualize. Regime type clearly shapes the primary tools of resistance. Autocracies lean heavily on coercion, repression, and ensuring security loyalty, often bolstered by external allies and their own capacity to learn and adapt, while actively exploiting opposition weaknesses. Democracies, on the other hand, tend to neutralize protests more subtly through institutional channels, leveraging their inherent legitimacy and the sheer exhaustion factor in stable systems. Cutting across all of this is technology, a chaotic accelerant enabling faster mobilization, but also hyper-efficient surveillance and control. And we're seeing a newer phenomenon that deserves attention: the emergence of regime learning networks. Authoritarian states are increasingly sharing protest management techniques across borders, China advising Russia, Russia advising Venezuela, Belarus learning from both. These knowledge transfers of repressive best practices create a kind of authoritarian international that significantly raises the barriers for protesters. The overarching theme, whether through brute force, sophisticated absorption, or cross-border authoritarian collaboration, modern states seem to have developed a more robust toolkit for handling mass challenges than perhaps was the case a few decades ago. The path from mass mobilization to regime overthrow appears significantly more obstructed. Now let's talk about that often cited, almost talismanic figure, the 3.5% rule. Popularized by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan's groundbreaking work, their historical analysis found that nonviolent campaigns surpassing sustained participation of roughly 3.5% of the population almost always succeeded. It's an incredibly influential and, frankly, inspiring finding. And you knew there was a but. We have to ask critical questions in light of our discussion. That research primarily covered campaigns up to the mid-2000s. Does that threshold, derived from an era before ubiquitous smartphones, AI-powered surveillance, and sophisticated digital authoritarianism, still hold the same predictive power? When regimes can precisely identify and neutralize key activists using digital footprints, or shut down communication networks at critical moments, does simply hitting a numerical target guarantee success, especially against a unified security apparatus? It's worth noting that Chenoweth herself, in more recent work published in 2023, has acknowledged these shifting dynamics and the new challenges movements face in the digital age. Furthermore, defining and measuring active participation across diverse cases is inherently tricky, and it's plausible the threshold itself might differ depending on the specific type of regime. While large numbers undoubtedly still pressure regimes, Preliminary analyses looking at post-2010 data suggest a potential weakening of that direct correlation between participation size and regime overthrow success. The relationship likely still exists, but the 3.5% figure might need significant caveats or recalibration in our current technological and political context. It's less a magic number, perhaps, and more a reminder that broad-based participation remains crucial. But its translation into success is increasingly mediated by regime counter-strategies. Before we declare the case closed, a dose of humility is in order. Every research effort, including this podcast series, has limitations. Our definition of success as purely regime overthrow, while necessary for analytical clarity, deliberately ignores significant policy victories or long-term cultural shifts that movements might achieve. Our selection of cases, while aiming for diversity, is inevitably incomplete and perhaps influenced by the very recent, visible struggles. Furthermore, the data we rely on measuring protest size, repression levels, even regime type, is often imperfect, inconsistent, or subject to debate. And perhaps most importantly, reality is fiendishly complex. Attributing precise causal weight to any single factor is risky. These elements interact in ways that are difficult to fully disentangle. We also haven't deeply explored other potentially crucial factors like the specific qualities of movement leadership, the power of different ideologies, the nuances of economic grievances, or important regional variations. For instance, why similar protest movements in North Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe during the same period produced such different outcomes. There's also the matter of path dependency, how a society's historical experiences with protest shape current dynamics, and of course, the simple role of chance and contingency in history. So, consider our conclusions robustly argued, hopefully, but not definitive gospel. So, beyond just describing the problem, what does this analysis mean for how we think about social movements and political change? Firstly, it strongly reinforces the idea that our theories aren't universal laws. Political process theory, resource mobilization, collective action, their explanatory power shifts dramatically depending on whether you're in a stable democracy, a brittle dictatorship, or somewhere in between, and increasingly depending on the digital environment. Context is king. Secondly, our discussion tempers the early, perhaps naive, techno-optimism surrounding digital tools for activism. Technology is a contested field, and states have proven remarkably adept at turning tools of liberation into tools of control. Thirdly, this synthesis hopefully bridges the gap between studies focused purely on social movements and those focused on regime stability, showing how state strategies and movement dynamics are deeply intertwined. One emerging theoretical framework worth highlighting is what some scholars have termed the protest paradox. The curious phenomenon where mass protests appear to be increasing in frequency globally, while simultaneously decreasing in their effectiveness at achieving fundamental change. This paradox crystallizes much of what we've explored throughout the series. Maybe a useful concept going forward is adaptive capacity. In this complex, rapidly evolving environment, perhaps the key determinant of outcomes is the relative ability of movements and regimes to learn, innovate, and adapt their strategies in response to each other. Who is quicker on their feet? Our contribution, hopefully, has been to weave these threads together, offering a coherent framework grounded in theory and evidence to understand why overthrowing regimes via protest seems harder now than it once did. Naturally, answering one question often raises several more. Our exploration leaves plenty of avenues for future research. What are the long-term consequences of these large-scale, but ultimately unsuccessful, protest waves? Do they subtly shift political culture, create new networks, or simply lead to deeper state control and citizen disillusionment? We need more research on the actual effectiveness of different digital repression tools, How much impact does surveillance really have compared to traditional methods? And how are activists innovating to counter it? More systematic, comparative work is needed on specific strategies. When do leaderless movements work better or worse than hierarchical ones? How do different ways of framing grievances resonate under different conditions? The impact of targeted disinformation campaigns is another crucial area needing deeper investigation. A particularly promising research direction is what we might call the authoritarian learning effect. How regimes systematically learn from each other's successes and failures in handling protests. We saw this with the Arab Spring, where later regimes adapted based on earlier outcomes, and we're seeing it today with the exchange of techniques between places like Russia, China, and Iran. We also need more granular studies digging into the black box of elite decision-making during crises. What truly convinces security chiefs or economic oligarchs to stick with a regime or abandon it? An emerging research frontier is the unique character of climate-related protests and how new cross-border activist networks might be shifting traditional dynamics. Methodologically, the field constantly needs better ways to measure these complex phenomena in challenging environments. And so, we reach the end of our series. Our core argument, woven through these episodes, is that achieving regime overthrow through mass demonstration in the modern era is exceptionally difficult. Regimes, both autocratic and democratic, have developed sophisticated mechanisms, some brutal, some subtle, to withstand popular pressure. Enhanced state capacity, amplified by technology, confronts movements grappling with their own internal challenges and the complexities of mobilization in the digital age. The relatively open political environment that facilitated some transitions in the late 20th century seems to have given way to a landscape where states are more resilient, more adaptive, and often more ruthless. If there's a silver lining to this rather bleak assessment, it's this. Historical analysis shows that revolutionary waves often require multiple cycles before achieving breakthrough success. What appears to be failure in the moment may actually be laying essential groundwork for future transformation. The 1848 revolutions in Europe largely failed in their immediate objectives, but profoundly shaped the political landscape for decades afterward. Today's unsuccessful movements might be planting seeds whose fruit we simply can't yet recognize. Does this mean mass demonstration is futile? Not necessarily. It achieves other vital things, changing laws, shifting norms, giving voice to the voiceless. But for the specific maximalist goal of regime overthrow, the odds appear longer, the path more treacherous than historical highlights might suggest. Understanding these formidable obstacles, the intricate defenses of modern power structures, is perhaps the crucial first step for those who still seek to challenge them. The capacity for collective action to reshape the world certainly hasn't vanished, but ingenuity, strategic adaptation, and perhaps more than a little luck seem increasingly essential ingredients. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. This is Kaede, signing off.